Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Kaizen Central from Manufacturing TV. I shall turn on my video so you can see me in what is left of my glory, and a very warm welcome to Graham Cruikshank, who's Chief Technical Officer at CPI up there in the Northeast, coming to talk to us today about the circular economy and manufacturing. And what really intrigues me is the extent to which some of what we talk about quite glibly as being the road to net zero and change coming upon us is that could actually be quite dramatic, and we want to discover just how radical some of this change might be. Graham, I'm not going to try and steal any of your thunder. Do please talk to us about. You've got some slides to show us, and then I'd really want to get people's thoughts on this, and just so we can try to understand a little bit more about what the circular economy means to manufacturing, and really what we should be preparing for right now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nick, for the invitation to join you this evening. Lovely to see you all. Thank you very much for giving up your time on what may well be the last sunny day of the year here in the UK. I'm going to try and share my screen, although I've just realised I haven't shared on Zoom for quite some time because we've all become so Teamsified in our place. Oh, this isn't going to work. Do you see my slides and only my slides, or do you see all you guys at the side of the screen as well?
I can see your slide and then little bits of us on the right hand side.
So it is okay. I'm going to try and move it a little bit so that we don't lose too much of the stuff. Good evening, everyone. My name is Graham Cruikshank. I am the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at CPI. CPI are one of the Catapult Centres in the UK. I'll explain that a little bit more. I have a dreadful Scottish accent. For that, I apologise. That's because I'm from the west of Scotland, a place called Ayr. And as Andy Dorset knows, Ayr United are my beloved team, and they're also the cross I have to bear. I studied chemistry at Edinburgh University back in the times when ICI was the mothership of the chemical industry around the world. So my PhD was funded by ICI, but I didn't go to ICI. That is relevant and does come back to play later. I, like Andy, took the Americans' money and I went to Procter & Gamble. For 20 odd years, I worked in formulating consumer goods. So for instance, I helped formulate the very first fairy tablet ever to go in your dishwasher. And then, like Andy, more recently driving the adoption of low temperature washing with products like Ariel. But I guess my career high, which sort of spans into this sort of sustainability area, even though it itself used chemicals, was I commuted the world for 3 years between Guatemala and the Philippines, developing Pure, a water purification product which is used for disaster relief. So a British water treatment plant scaled down into a small sachet, which essentially costs the price of an egg, and it's used to turn a bucket of stuff that looks like Guinness into a bucket of stuff that's cleaner than British tap water. And that was a fantastic opportunity to make a difference. I'm still based in the northeast in Newcastle, hence my Newcastle Falcons logo there, and I am married with two daughters who've just completed GCSEs and A-levels, so it has been one hell of a summer, as you can imagine. The reason as a guy looking inside a washing machine is I spent more time looking after washing machines, dishwashers and tumble dryers than any man should, because I was working in the alliances between the detergent manufacturers like P&G and the appliance manufacturers, you know, the Whirlpools, the Maytags, the Hires, the Miele's, the Hotpoints of this world. Because as systems change, when products are used as part of a system, they have to change together. So if someone makes a sustainable choice, but doesn't bring the rest of the ecosystem with it, it can have unintended consequences and bad things can happen. So for instance, washing machines today are way more sustainable than they were 20 years ago, because they use a fraction of the water, heating it to a much lower temperature, hence using a fraction of the energy. That's great. However, if you use the detergent that you used to buy 20 years ago in today's washing machine, it wouldn't work terribly well. And that's why those of you who work in products which form part of a system have to desperately try and stay up to date and up to pace with how the partners around you are evolving. Now, in that role, I guess I learned that partnership sounds easy, but it's actually quite hard. And developing a win-win mindset is quite tricky, because actually the more closely you and your partners are interrelated, sometimes the less likely you are to collaborate, because you almost see too much competition between each other. And therefore that can be a frustration. So working in partnership is harder than it sounds. Now, about 6 years ago, I was approached to see, had I heard of CPI, had I heard of the Catapults, had I heard of the Formulation Centre, which is the building on the right there? The answer was no. The headhunters explained it to me 3 times and I still didn't get it. But the bit that I took away was my success metric in joining a Catapult was to help protect and grow jobs in the UK in particular. Jobs elsewhere as well are important, but because we have received government funding in the UK, my emphasis is to help protect and grow jobs in the UK. And I found that incredibly motivating. So I set up that particular facility, which is the National Formulation Centre, where we help people develop new formulated materials more sustainably, i.e. how do you do R&D by using much less material? The answer to that is high throughput robotic systems rather than big vats of chemicals. And at the moment, how do we help people scale up and formulate materials for batteries for the electric vehicles of the future? Because actually, we don't quite know how to do that well enough yet to have the power density, power capacity, and charge rate that's required for us to drive this move to electric vehicles. So we all want to make a sustainable choice, but actually we have to make sure that the industry comes with us and the supply chain comes with us, and that's part of my job. A couple of years ago, I moved from only looking after formulation to being CPI's Chief Technology Innovation Officer overall, spanning the 5 sites and that little logo in the bottom corner there. And anyone with sharp eyes will say, oh, Graham, aren't those pretty much all the old ICI sites that once were? Yeah. That's the connection. CPI is born from what was once ICI and retains some of the large assets that ICI used to run, like the large-scale biofermenters that are able to take waste gases and turn them into valuable products. Today, the guys have developed processes that take waste gases from the cracker and turn them into food, which is fed to salmon in Scotland, and we then eat the Scottish salmon, which is a more sustainable way of farming salmon. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that the next step would to go from making food for salmon to making food for humans. Yes, corn-like alternatives, so future proteins. So we're involved heavily in a range of sustainability areas, but what I wanted to talk to you was give you a super fast introduction to the high-value manufacturing Catapult that we're part of and why sustainability matters so much to us. But then I want to go off script and off piste, and I'm probably going to say things that will get me shot by some of my colleagues, because I'm going to give you some of the potentially politically unacceptable responses around this notion of the unintended consequences of sustainability, because not all sustainable decisions are actually the right decisions. And in fact, I do see examples of people around me all over the place in the industry who say, I can't do right for doing wrong. I keep making decisions which I think are sustainable. Next thing I know, someone tells me that's the wrong thing to do. Bit like, buy a diesel car because it has less CO2 emissions. Oh no, nobody told me about the particulates. In the same way that people are going to say, buy a battery vehicle because it's going to have so much more range. Well, no one's actually finished the calculation on the embedded carbon on those materials and indeed the consequences of digging up most of Nigeria to get the copper, nickel and cadmium, not copper, manganese, nickel and cadmium to make the battery materials. And then I'm going to I'd like to have a little bit of debate with you about going through what's known as the 10 R's models. I'll give you some trivial examples that my mum would understand, because if my mum understands it, I could just about understand it. But I'd like to then see how that may translate into the sort of sectors and industries that you're in. I can't see you. I don't know the sectors or industries you're in, so I'm just going to hope we'll have a wee bit of a conversation at that time. So the Catapult Network exists all across the UK. It frankly is really messy and really complicated, and that's why it's quite hard for people to engage with us, because they don't quite know who to talk to when. I recognize that that's a bit of a challenge, but doing talks like this is part of our opportunity to explain who we are and where we are. So the Catapult Network is capability that's designed to be open access for innovators in the UK to come and access kit and people and experience to help them scale up and develop their ideas faster. So the Catapults don't invent stuff. We're not doing research. We don't sell stuff. We don't do commercialization. We do the old-fashioned R&D in the middle, the scale-up part that's expensive and time-consuming. The HVMC in particular is focused on driving high-value manufacturing. And how do we do that? Well, we enable companies to understand, embrace, adopt, and trial state-of-the-art manufacturing capabilities, and often reapply technologies from one sector to another. Main technology themes on the right-hand side there. Digital, I saw some of you had digital sort of banners in your backgrounds. Absolutely, digital adoption is absolutely vital for us to drive productivity, and from that, sustainability metrics as well. I won't go through all this because you can read as fast as I can speak it. We have a whole range of strategic objectives that the government's expecting us to work on, from increasing the uptake of digital, driving additive manufacturing, how do we retain aerospace manufacturing in the UK, how do I increase automation in food and drink, how do we drive electric vehicle adoption? How do we grow? That's the bit that's maybe slightly politically sensitive, is how do we grow our overall energy policy? And I'll put my cards on the table. I'm a fan of nuclear. You want sustainable energy, it's hard to beat nuclear. It has other consequences, and you might disagree with them. I get it. But if you want low CO2 emissions, nuclear is a great solution. And those are the sorts of thorny things that we have to grapple with. Driving sustainability in construction, CPI, where I work, has particular emphasis on the next two, which is around healthcare and pharmaceuticals, and driving sustainable manufacturing for pharmaceuticals in the UK. Driving the circular economy, where we talk about bio-derived materials. So the biotechnology division of CPI is how do we use biochemistry and fermentation to turn a range of wastes, that could be agricultural waste, it could be waste gases like CO2, frankly, and convert it into something more useful. Because many people like oil and want to use oil-type products. We just shouldn't be digging it out of the ground anymore. So if you can create materials which look and behave a bit like oil, but they came from bio-derived sources, that's good. Let's have some more of that. Vehicles, through life engineering services, and defense. Through life engineering services is an interesting one, because I used to dismiss it because we don't do much of it. But with hindsight, it is one of the single biggest drivers of the sustainability agenda. Don't go making stuff and then letting it break and throw it away. When you get a new toy, look after your toy, protect your toy, make your toy last longer. That has a significantly bigger sustainability impact than you reducing your waste or recycling stuff, to be honest with you. So these are the areas that we're involved in. Now, we all know this uncomfortable truth that, frankly, the 20th century, we all got selfish, greedy, and lazy. To be perfectly honest with you, by we I mean mankind, I mean humankind, I mean us on the surface of the planet. And everyone says, "Oh, the planet's in a disaster. The planet's in a disaster." The planet will be fine. The planet will be fine. We won't be. We may not be able to live on it anymore, but the planet will be fine and it will recover, because what we've done in our quest for efficiency in manufacturing is started to produce more stuff than we ever needed, without necessarily thinking about the consequences of that production. So the schematic on the right there, I think, quite interesting. So in reality, if we were all Vietnam, we'd be absolutely fine. If we were all India, we'd be totally fine. Well, why don't I want to be like India? Well, India, you might argue, has unmet needs. It's unsustainable in the sense that it doesn't have base levels of sanitation and education available for everybody. So in fact, to achieve a balance, we need to understand how we don't overconsume, but equally, how do we not under-deliver for our peoples? Places like Qatar and the US are seen as being so massively overconsumptive of energy, but that's interesting. If you actually look at a plot of where the overconsumers are, they're either very hot or very cold, because it's finding an environment with a temperature that we can live in tends to cause us to use lots of energy. And I quite glibly said, but that's okay. That was the 20th century. We're not in the 20th anymore. We're in the 21st. And I make a case that says 21st century engineering, or even better still, 19th century engineering and innovations may well be what get us out of this, to help make the world a better and safer place to live. Because in the 19th century, good old-fashioned Victorian engineering principles applied. You didn't waste stuff. You only made stuff that you really needed. You built it to last, and you built it to be repairable. And those are themes that, frankly, people need to start re-embracing again. I talked about overshooting and undershooting human needs, and this is a thing called the donut economic model. I'm sure I'm teaching my granny things here. You guys all know this, but the donut model is well thought through, in that we really want to be in that green and yellow band around all of those different areas, where if we undershoot, and there's a shortfall in our educational needs or our health provision or food availability, then actually we're not meeting the basic needs of humanity, and that's not good. We do need to increase production beyond that bit in the middle of the donut. But when we start overshooting and start over-consuming and overproducing, then we have significant ongoing consequences for the planet around acidification. Climate change is the big one, and the one that we're all aligning behind. But interestingly, even within climate change, there's a conversation going on at the minute that our laser focus on addressing climate change through carbon emissions can lead us to make some slightly dodgy decisions on things like land conversion. I'm sorry for picking on Andy and others from that sort of sector, but do we really need to cut up most of the forests in Indonesia to plant palm oil just so that we can have some of the consumer goods that we wanted that didn't use petroleum-based oil? Yeah, less CO2 emissions, but actually, was that the right thing for the land, for the water, and for the air supplies around us? Okay. Now, again, you'll all be very familiar with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation model, which some people call the butterfly model, which talks about, well, I sometimes talk about leveraging nature and leveraging engineering. The green side, the left-hand side, is how do we make better use of nature's bounty and nature's source of materials, and how do we use biochemistry and biotechnology to create materials again from agricultural waste streams, more effective farming and fishing, etc. So we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that nature has a way of helping us. But most of the people on this call are probably looking at the right-hand side, the blue feedback loops, which are, you're all familiar with reduce, reuse, recycle. Yeah, very good. That's about efficiency, right? That's good old-fashioned process engineering, first-pass process efficiency. Don't waste stuff, maintain your kit, reuse materials where you can, recycle where you can. Good old-fashioned sensible engineering, which isn't enough. Let's be very clear. That's not enough for us to retain the planet in a habitable format, because that's what we have been doing for quite some time now, but it's not sufficient. So it's necessary, but not sufficient. Now, the shift in the landscape that we see around is this notion of change in design thinking. Design in any product is incredibly important. Everyone quotes the numbers ever so slightly differently, but essentially design locks in 90% of the embedded carbon in the end product. It casts the longest shadow. So designing a product with the right end in mind is critical, because that influences which materials you use and how it's maintained, et cetera, et cetera. So previously, or in recent times, EU has all been around, design the product to minimize the impact on the environment. That's fine, but it tends to have consequences. It tends to not be as well thought through or holistic or circular as people need it to be. There is a notion now that we need to start developing restorative or regenerative design. So how within your ecosystem of your process, so process may well be a supply chain in your industries, how are you revitalizing those resources? How are you recreating energy or materials within that process? Recycling being a key part of that. But I think the thing that maybe is gathering most traction in the sectors that I talk to is this notion of design for X. They talk about design for X, which I think of, funnily enough, as a return to those 19th century Victorian engineering principles of design at the outset to ensure that materials can be recovered or reused, or that your product can be refurbished or remanufactured, or that recycling is appropriate because, I designed it for easy disassembly. So cars today are designed for you to clip out and clip back in an entire light cluster just because a bulb's gone, because it was no longer designed to be easy to access the back of the light unit to replace the bulb. But I remember replacing the bulbs on the car with my dad out on the street. And that was a way more efficient process, but the car was designed to allow repair. It was designed to allow you to access those parts of the machine. And it's a return to some of those sorts of thinking principles, I think, will be needed to deliver sustainability and will likely be needed for our industries to thrive, because you know what? My daughters are going to demand you do it. My daughters are going to demand that they don't just throw away that product when it's consumed. Not me, my daughters will. So if we want to survive as businesses, we have to be reacting to that need. Now, everyone talks about circular economy and everyone refers to industrial symbiosis. And it's true, it does exist. And frankly, if anyone is as old as me and does remember ICI and does know the Wilton site up near Middlesbrough, it was almost the perfect example of circular economy, because a chemical plant is the perfect example of the waste stream of one reactor is almost always the feedstock of another. There's virtually nothing wasted. It may go in as oil, but what comes out are 50 different products that consumed all those different parts of the oil. The waste of the cyanide process actually makes fertilizer. The waste of the fertilizer actually is what feeds the solvent process for drug manufacturing. It's an incredibly efficient circular process. Now, the other ones that are well known are these Finnish examples, primarily based on paper and pulp and waste recovery and energy recovery. And these sorts of circular systems within which a closed loop can be imagined, or close to a closed loop, because there's always losses somewhere, but a relatively efficient closed loop are brilliant. But we can't just wave a magic wand and expect all industries to be like this. These were designed and built purposefully like this at the outset. So they were thinking about this when they started building these processes, when they started building these factories, when they started building these supply chains. So this notion that suddenly we can retrofit everything and we can join up all of the parts of the UK and have a circular system is slightly naive thinking, I would say. But what it does maybe start to challenge is, okay, if we are building stuff afresh, we should be building these sorts of ecosystems with a supply chain that's interconnected. And by the way, maybe we don't need the mega factories we once had. Maybe there is a role for smaller manufacturing footprints, distributed supply chains, smaller processes for waste recovery, smaller processes for recycling, because at certain scales, an efficiency does exist. Our previous thinking taught us that what we needed was a big factory operating at full capacity in a central location, making as much product on spec as possible to get the lowest cost. Didn't always take into account the other costs, the cost to the environment, the CO2 emissions, the impact on water, the impact on particulates created by road traffic, etc., etc. And when you start factoring in those costs on top of the costs of goods, actually smaller, discrete manufacturing facilities may well have a bigger role to play. Now, as I've come into this area I actually lead the circular economy strategy team for the HVMC, and I came in as a novice, but I have many colleagues around me who really are experts in this area. The one thing I really latched onto was this notion, which is the earlier in the process you make an intervention to do something sustainable, the better. Did I design the process? Oh, I'm going to recycle it. So what industry is going to have to face up to is actually, how do I address what we make, or what we need actually, and how we make it? There's two mindset shifts here about, do I still need to make the same piles of stuff I used to make? Maybe I do, maybe I don't, up for you to decide. But if I am making the same stuff, how the heck do I make that more efficient than I did in the past? And again, I'm sorry for harping back to the chemical industry, and Andy Dorset and others will chime in, but everyone knows that first pass process efficiency is the key driver. The higher you get your first process yield, the more efficient your overall process will be. Okay, so I'm going to go down through these notions because there are what they call this 10 R's model, but it might require many businesses to think about redesigning their business model. And it may be that they can't produce the same stuff in the same quantities in the past, but it doesn't mean to say that they can't produce the same amount of value from it. That, I think, is what has to change. The mindset has to be, I still need to make value to grow our economy. I just don't necessarily need to make the same piles of stuff anymore. I think pre-COVID, I think we all talked about the world being at the tipping point of maximum stuff. We all had too much stuff. How do I start making money from less stuff is an interesting challenge. So you've probably all read ahead of me on here. So the first one is this notion of refusing. How do you make a product redundant or abandon its function? Well, that doesn't sound, as a manufacturing group here, that doesn't necessarily sound good. How do I do it without manufacturing something? Well, actually, it can exist, and it does happen around us, and it does represent an opportunity for others. I mean, I do remember buying a TomTom in my to put into my car to help me go around. Frankly, I haven't seen a TomTom in years, but in the same way that I haven't really seen a Walkman, and I haven't really seen a portable DVD player, and I haven't really seen an Atlas, and actually, I'm not entirely sure I carry a wallet anymore now, because I've got a consolidation of so many functions into a single device, which in and of itself is more sustainable. But here's the old unintended consequences piece. All of that data that is being stored in the cloud does actually consume huge amounts of energies to maintain those servers and those data banks. That's why they'll be moved to Iceland, because we have to cool them down because they heat up so much. Maybe it'd be better if we tap the heat that comes off them actually, rather than just letting them cool down, right? People might even make a case that says a paper map is more sustainable than the TomTom and my phone that I carried it on. So we do need to be careful that we don't get suckered into thinking that an apparently more sustainable choice is. But there are some which we're all relishing. This at the moment, this Teams call, as opposed to us all meeting in a central location, has had a massive impact. So we have refused to travel, but we've not refused to meet or connect or do business. We've found an alternative. I've got teenage daughters, and frankly, the house is vegetarian, verging on vegan. So I don't refuse meat. I just never get access to meat because there's none in my house. But that is a reality, that plant-based proteins will represent an opportunity for people who refuse meat. And that's not just on the methane's emissions. There's an ethical component around the meat as well. And let's be clear, I still eat meat. In fact, we'll touch on it a bit later. So did anyone have any comments to make there? I think what I said was, rather than me just talk, I feel like I've already talked at you for a good 20 minutes now. Goodness me. Anyone want to chip in or start sharing anything?
I think if you crack on,
I'll keep going. I'll go on. If anyone does want to interject, please do. Feel free to interject at any point, then, guys, folks, if that's okay. So the whole notion about rethinking your business is an interesting one, because how do I make the product use more intensive? Frankly, I used to argue that most sustainable laundry was for everyone not to have a washing machine, but to take their clothes to a laundromat or a tunnel laundry, because the amount of energy and water per garment is a fraction of that if we all have a washing machine. So in fact, shared products and services are often way more sustainable. The whole notion about how do I get point-to-point travel? Do I really need a car, or is it more effective to take an Uber? My daughter is having troubles with her driving test at the minute, and it's maybe not a bad thing, because I'm not even sure she's going to need a car in future. But point-to-point travel is critical. So the whole notion of the EasyJet model versus the BA model, what people realize was, I want to go from Newcastle to Mallorca. I don't want to go from Newcastle to London to get another flight to Mallorca. And so there is a sustainability benefit in ensuring what is the job I'm trying to do is to get from A to B. It's not to have necessarily an experience in an airport. And I know my colleagues from the aviation industry won't be happy with that. Reduce is relatively straightforward. How do I make things more efficient? How do I make my process more efficient? How do I make my manufacturing more efficient? And how do I consume fewer materials? And the example I've got here is from the world that I came from, which was the notion of compacting detergent. Was quite straightforward. So those two bottles in that image essentially have the same number of wash loads in them, but one is a fraction of the size of the other because the chemistry inside it has been compacted, it's been made smaller and more powerful. So in fact, the opportunity is, how do I get people to pay more money for less stuff? This was the beef thing I was talking about. In that I've made a deal with my vegan daughter that I will take her to the farm shop that's just down the road from our house, and she can have whatever vegetables she likes, as long as they're locally sourced and in season. And I'm going to buy a significant piece of beef, which is relatively small in size, but very high in quality. And I'm going to enjoy it guilt-free. And I will have made that farmer more money than him having tried to mass produce something which is being sold in the supermarket. Being a Scot, whiskey is the other example. Most Scots will tell you, we don't drink the cheap stuff that comes out at volume. We select and savor and pay more for that which we value more highly. So in fact, many people need to remember that benefits to products are often emotional rather than functional. If you talk to me about an emotional benefit, I will pay more. An espresso pod for a cup of coffee at 40 pence, when the granules would be about 2 pence. Yes, but the emotional benefit was worth paying, and its environmental impact, in some instances, the whiskey example, is lower. And this is what I mean about being careful of the unintended consequences. Things like palm oil have caused deforestation of most of Indonesia, and for goodness knows how many orangutans and Sumatran tigers are now dehomed. So we need to be careful what we wish for when we ask for a sustainable solution. Reuse, again, can be fairly straightforward, but it's how can another consumer use a discarded product which is still in good condition? Well, okay, frankly, for me, the single best example of a sustainable marketplace is eBay. In that, frankly, I don't mind admitting this to you, I buy the vast majority of my clothes on eBay. But what I select to buy are relatively high-end, relatively highly branded items that someone else may not have worn at all, or may have worn once and decided that it doesn't fit them. But I pay a fraction of the cost. So there is value exchange in eBay. So that's not just sustainability for sustainability's sake of reusing the clothes. There's a market to be had there where there is value to be retained by someone taking something from a consumer that doesn't want it. I've got an example here of the milk bottles, where again, growing up, we had milk delivered in a sustainable vessel in an electric vehicle. A milk float drove down our street at 4 o'clock in the morning. You didn't hear it. That was the whole point. So it's not a new innovation. We've had them, but they work well at the local level. One of the messages I'm hoping you're picking up from me is, I think local solutions have a bigger part to play than national/global solutions. Sometimes some of my American colleagues used to talk about, trying to swing for the fences didn't work, just take the base hit. So sometimes smaller wins will add up to a bigger win at the end. We don't always have to try and swing for some massive grand thing that's going to change the world. Deposit bottle schemes being an example of that. the notion of designing products and then being able to deliver repair and maintenance of defective products is something that has value that we need to remember. I know the through life engineering guys talk about the challenges of maintaining turbines, because they need to be designed for easier access and designed for easier disassembly. I've actually got a washing machine downstairs today which has broken, and I'm waiting for the service engineer to come out. Now, my wife did ask me, well, should we not just go to Curry's and buy a new washing machine? No. Why would I? I bought a high quality machine because I know it's repairable, but that is consumer habit driven. So in Germany, for instance, they would typically buy a Miele or high-end Bosch or Siemens washing machine with an average life expectancy of 20 years, but they pay over €1,000 for that machine. In the UK, we would typically buy a Hotpoint or an Indesit or a Beko with a cost of about £199 and an average life expectancy of 18 months. Do the maths. Who was smarter? Who made the smarter choice, both for their wallet and for the environment? And guess what? It wasn't the UK. Right? But again, the reason I am so supportive of repair is because to drive our economy and maintain our society, we have to have jobs. I see value in there being jobs for repair people and maintenance people, and not just people who work on a manufacturing line. Okay. Refurbishing, restoring an old product, bring it back up to date. I guess, laptops and upgrading those and upgrading operating systems. And frankly, we have a number of Apple devices in this house, all of which were bought new from Apple. No, they weren't. They were bought refurbished from Apple. So I, again, sought to extract value from the market. I wasn't paying £1,500 for the laptop, but I will give you £900 because it's one which has had the back taken of it and someone's footed around with it and refreshed and changed out one or two components. Fine. Remanufacturing is a very interesting one, which is about how do you take parts of a discarded product and turn them into a new product, possibly with the same function, possibly a slightly different function. The photos here on the side, Andy, were meant to be a bit fun, and I do remember the debates back in the day when the fairy liquid bottle changed from the white one on the top to the one that we have today, which is transparent, was could kids still make a space rocket out of it? Because the single biggest thing that you do with a fairy liquid bottle is the Blue Peter challenge of turning it into a space rocket. And Graham, don't go changing the packaging if we can't make space rockets out of it anymore. And lo and behold, they can make even better space rockets out of the new fairy liquid bottle than they could out of the old one. Okay, that's a bit trite, that's a bit trivial, but the example I was going to talk about was back to eBay. I sold something on eBay, the chap came to collect it, we got talking, and he was explaining to me that he had a bet with people in his office that he could go to the waste paper bin in their office, take out items from the bin and put them on eBay and sell them. And his office didn't believe him. And he did. He went to the bin, took out some items, put them on eBay and made money. And it turns out that what his business was on the side of ships, you'll see these white things that look a bit like eggs. And they're actually fiberglass casings for life rafts. So there's life rafts inside this fiberglass casing, and that's what they made. And in his bin, he had lots of offcuts of glass fiber fabric, half-used tubes of epoxy, half-used tubes of hardener. And he put them on eBay as a small piece of fiberglass and a half-used tube of epoxy, and got 25 quid for a piece this big. Because what he discovered was that people who make model aeroplanes and model boats often crash them and they often break, and they often have to repair their model aeroplane wing with a small piece of fiberglass. But they don't need to access a huge sheet of fiberglass, they just want a bit this big. But would gladly pay him £25 for a piece of fiberglass, which he was getting for about 5p, never mind £25. So the notion of thinking about what you have and thinking about where you're discarding it, where else does that have a product function and can I extract value from it? That's what will drive a sustainability. That's what will drive a circular economy, not the, oh, I'm doing good because it's a good thing. No. Do think about who makes money out of it, because if someone makes money, it'll happen. The notion of repurposing as part of a product I think is one that many people think about, and they often talk about upcycling discarded furniture, etc., which is great. But the classic example I have is the Nutella glass. My cupboard downstairs is full of these drinking glasses that the kids drink out of, but they're not drinking glasses. They were jars of Nutella that I bought that became drinking glasses. So it never needed to be recycled. I simply repurposed that material. That glass was blown, it was formed into that glass, which was a jar, but rather than sending it back, I give it another life by repurposing it as the drinking glass. And another point there is around repurposing is how can you take discarded products and then turn it into a new product? Now, My colleagues in the offshore wind industry are I don't know if there's anyone on the call, but it's probably not too much of a stretch to say they're panicking a little bit, because within the next 5 years, there's 150,000 tons of wind turbine blades about to be decommissioned in the North Sea, and nobody knows what to do with them. And we don't have enough fields sitting around to pile up 150,000 tons of wind turbine blades. So there's a great deal of energy around what can you do with these? How can you reuse these materials? And there is a great deal of energy going on to how can I use that structure, that strut, and make something else out of it. So, you know, there are programs that take wind turbine blades and cut them up and turn them into these bleacher seats in a stadium, in the same way that they could be turned into telephone masts or old-fashioned telegraph poles, if you like, the wooden poles. Those sorts of poles could be made by simply cutting up turbine blades. Well, that makes sense. That's a repurposing of a material. We didn't have to melt it down. We didn't have to transport it too far, but we did repurpose it. Those represent opportunities. Recycling is obvious. So the richest man I know is a friend of mine who, when we were young, bought himself a scaffy wagon. Now, a scaffy wagon is the Scots word for a dustbin lorry. He bought a dustbin lorry and went round all the farms in Dumfries and Galloway, picking up all the black plastic that was used to wrap their bales of hay. And that was, he actually got paid to take the black plastic away from the farms. He then set up a small factory that essentially made a plastic remolding and extruder and turned it into slats of wood that are made of plastic. And he makes these garden tables and picnic tables, which he sells at an incredible price because he got some contract from various local authorities to provide picnic and seating areas at the side of motorways using the black plastic that he harvested from the fields. That's smart, turning waste to worth. The image at the bottom was an interesting one. That's actually that's a picture of some indium. For us to have all the smart electronics we're expecting to have, there isn't enough indium left in the world. There's not enough iridium either. We're going to have to start recycling it from our previous electronics, which have all been discarded somewhere. So this notion of urban mining for rare earth metals, the world doesn't have any more of them, guys. They were rare for a reason. We've been using them faster than we should have done. We're going to have to get our hands dirty and get back into those piles of electronics and start re-extracting some of those rare earths. And it's only then do you actually get down to the stuff that where we talk about energy recovery. This is the stuff that you see on the news, all the waste piles of waste food, etc., which might go into an anaerobic digester to make gases, or it might go directly to incineration, where they try and recover that energy from municipal solid waste. But guys, too late. All the changes we needed to make for sustainability happened way earlier on in that list. And frankly, the money is made way earlier on in that list. Thank you.
Wow, Graham, that was amazing. Thank you very much. I've never seen such a comprehensive and frankly interesting, fascinating tour d'horizon, as they say, of the entire subject. I'd love to know the bit that's been bugging me ever since we decided that we're going to talk about this, is the extent to which change will happen organically or change will be thrust upon the sector, and to what extent should manufacturers, do you think, be looking now at changing business models in order to get ahead of the game?
Yeah. Look, it's just personal opinion, right? I mean, it's not hard data based. It's empirical and observation. So the only thing that I can guarantee in life is change. So change will come. It doesn't matter. The more you resist it, the more it comes. It's like one of these opposite motive forces. The more you push back, the harder the force is against you. So whether it's organic or mandated doesn't really matter. It's coming. I personally would seek for more mandated change. I actually quite like it when governments impose bans on things or strict requirements and regulations. And the reason I like it is it forces you to do something. It means you don't have a get-out clause. You've got to do something about it. And actually, as someone who came from an R&D environment, that was great because you were then backing yourself to be able to innovate your way out of it. Because if they don't change the rules, you just do the blah, blah, me too, incremental changes. If you actually want to drive innovation, someone needs to put a challenge down. Someone needs to lay down the gauntlet and you have to say, bloody hell, I'm going to have to do this really differently. But that's your chance to back yourself to do it better than your competitors. And that's how you'll win in the market ongoing.
Yeah, it's also, if it's mandated, there's an argument for saying that the short-term effects need cushioning from government funding, and of course that's not always as easy to.
Yes, and in the current climate, it is a little bit harder to have those conversations with the government because country's broke, right? I mean, he's already announced a new tax to pay for healthcare changes or social care changes, which will go to healthcare. It won't even get to social care. Therefore, that will come back in another couple of years. So now is not the time to be being too asking of the government. Now is the time to kind of shut up and row time, guys. If you see what I mean. But if you take it more positively and say that, look, my daughters are going to demand such and such a product, but my daughters will understand that and may have a mindset of being willing to pay more for it. That's the other thing that's changed. We created a culture of more for less. I'll pay you less every year and I expect more material. I want a bigger scoop of ice cream and I want it to be lower cost. I want a bigger box of detergent, but I want it to cost less. That's unsustainable as a business. But actually, the generations behind me are more open to saying, but what is the value of that thing? And the value of that thing is how much I care about it, not its ticket price. So I can see a world where my more expensive locally sourced beef makes sense. My daughters will walk me around to the. I often talk about in the consumer goods sector, nobody wants the Me Too product. They all want the design for me, and Starbucks would be the example. I go in, I want a skinny latte frappuccino, double macchiato, shot of caramel or whatever. Oh, by the way, that's £5.50. Yeah, no bother. Here you go. Whereas previously you would argue about whether it was 50 pence or 55 pence in the clicks machine for the coffee. So when you take the product away from the functional benefit and get into the why it's the right emotional thing to do, it's more price, or it's less price sensitive. You have a greater degree of elasticity in how you price for and therefore are rewarded for those sorts of products.
Stephen Barr, you've got your hand up.
Hey, Graham, thank you so much for that. I've got 2 points. Firstly, if you're really paying 40p for an espresso, I want to live where you do. That doesn't
no, I was meaning
an
espresso pod. A pod for my Nespresso machine is about a pod is 40p
okay.
for the pod. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
I thought I'd discovered Nirvana.
Well, yeah. Newcastle is the place. It is. Well, here's the thing: you can have three vodkas for £1. If Andy Dorset will probably nod at that. I think I remember him.
I'm just going to log off, and I'll be right with you there. Let me ask my actual question. So you made a great point about not going to government for money because they ain't got none. If they were going to levy something, it would be on us, the taxpayers or the national insurance payers. The thing is, though, the picture you're painting is really quite complex from the point of view of a manufacturer. And there are plenty of other real manufacturers on this call. But from the point of view of a manufacturer, what are manufacturers supposed to do to drive net zero, to achieve net zero? There are so many things they could do. Quite a lot of them are risk-taking. I just wonder if you have a view on that from a semi-public sector organization.
I do not believe there is a single magic bullet. I do not believe there is a magic wand you wave, and if you all do this, everything will be fine. I just don't. I do believe that every manufacturer and every business is somewhat unique, but I do believe that they have some easy things they can change. I don't know what they are just now without knowing your situation, right? My only suggestion would be, don't wait. Start doing something. This is one of these situations where doing something is better than doing nothing. And keep your eyes and ears open to what your competitors are up to, because this is a sector where we should be stealing with pride, stealing someone else's sustainable idea with pride if it brings efficiency. Absolutely, but there isn't a magic bullet, Stephen. There isn't. And anyone who tells you, oh well, we just need to do such and such, we just need to turn our lights off when we leave the office, nah.
It's interesting. We have had almost evangelical manufacturers on here. I'm thinking the gang will know Richard Hagan at Crystal Doors, who's made it almost a mission to become definitely process net zero. Hard to become product net zero in the game he's in. But the fact of the matter is, he says he makes more money and gets more business because people, as you say, buy the message as well as the product. He continues to make an excellent product, of course, but it's it's how he does it. Steve, good evening, mate. How are you? You got your hand
good,
up.
thanks. Good. Well, since I spent 2 days trying to blooming kill myself, I've fallen off rocks in the lake in North Wales.
I was going to say that was rather alarming.
Yeah, it's just you look at me here live and you think it's something else I'm no good at, you know. I can't even succeed at that, you know. But okay, hey ho, bit of black humor. Okay, so at a first glance, Graham, I find everything you're saying very rational and reasonable. But as a challenge, I would say you're competing from a communications point of view with some very, very powerful forces. So I'd like to say one of the questions I'd like to ask you is to sort of complement all this reason and science and everything else that you got. Do you have a communication strategy so that this information goes out along with, you know, man bites dog and that sort of thing? In other words, so getting the whole country or getting millions of people to start to think like this requires a major communications effort. You're fighting with people who want to buy electric vehicles, whereas a diesel that does another 500,000 might be the better choice. And so do you have your organization have a communication strategy?
The organisation I work for, CPI, has its own specific communication strategy, which tends to focus more on healthcare and medicines and sustainable materials specifically. The HVMC overall does have a communication strategy, but yeah, you're right. It's not good enough.
Okay.
Interesting.
But because one of our truths is it's complicated. I don't have a simple message to go out. That's my point. It's not simple. If it was simple, I would have.
Buy a Tesla and save the world just isn't the way, as it were. You know, it has to be more. The Tesla supply chain could be a nightmare. I don't know.
It does. If what I'm hearing you say, Steve and Graham, is that there is, if you like, a vacuum, a communications vacuum, then what it means is that companies, manufacturers, who, to be generous, have a partial view of their role, they can fill that vacuum with glitzy information that at first blush looks very, very attractive, but actually is definitely not going to achieve what we want. And you mentioned Tesla. I'm not suggesting anything that they're doing or saying is wrong. It's just that if something appears easy and, dare I say it, a bit glib, then people might go for that, and then the unintended consequences kick in.
Dead right. I wouldn't say there was a communication vacuum. I would say it's the other way around. There's just so much noise. People have stopped listening. It's kind of like, I don't know what to listen to. There's just so much chatter everywhere. I've got no cut through for a specific message, and I've got so many people shouting very loudly, as you've said, Nick, with certain glitzy, glib one-liners that actually I want to believe. I'm not getting political here. Please bear with me. But the whole, whether it be get Brexit done or in America, some other sort of slogans as well. Actually, that gets cut through, not always because people want it, it's just because it was sort of simple and I understand it. The truth of the matter is, when you're trying to communicate the complicated, you've lost. You're already on a losing wicket.
Thanks. Luke, you've got your hand up, mate. And there we go.
Yeah, turn myself on mute. Really enjoyed that, Graham. Really enjoyed that. I think about a couple of points I wanted to say really was that I think it was powerful when you said it won't be you that's demanding, it'll be your children. And I think I sort of echo that sort of with kids. But then the sort of the way and the thing is that yes, they want this sustainability and they want this longevity, but then sometimes it's the act of convenience. They want it now. They want it straight away. So I think there's a challenge there for us. But I think my main question is this question of value. So you brought it around quite a lot, but it's the value that value makers can bring. So, but my question is, what about the people that don't bring value? And I think Nick sort of mentioned it several times in the past about what is the idea of value, and who brings value to the economy. And if you look at the non-value makers, the insurance companies, the finance people, really say that those sort of things. What is it for them to bring sustainability, circular economy into existence? And then if they're just looking at making profit and making money, then will that then attract people into those sort of environments in those sort of sectors, rather than attracting those people into the manufacturing engineers, where we're looking at a more circular economy and bringing value? I suppose it's a convoluted question.
A couple of different strands in there, and I may go down the wrong route, Luke, so bear with me. But the notion of sort of, you know, banks and insurance houses, etc., not adding value, I think they would take offence straight away there and tell me just how big a proportion of the UK economy they drive. But the value they create is that flow of funds to fund some of these sorts of innovations. Because without some of their longer term investment portfolios shifting from short term steady asset making through manufacturing to investment in batteries for electric vehicles would be an example, or alternative energy sources, or because they're going to have to carry some of the risk of some of those innovations, because they're not all going to work. A lot of these ideas, I think someone said there's too many ideas on the table. Yeah, there's too many ideas on the table. They're not all going to work. It might have been Steve Barr, actually. They're not all going to work. So someone somewhere is going to have to help fund, because it isn't going to be the British government at the minute. Someone's going to have to fund some of the innovation programs to assess which of these will fly. Then I think what I heard you say, Luke, was the other part was actually about some of our people, meaning some of our best scientists and engineers and young minds. What stops them going to the banking sector versus, you know, the manufacturing or engineering sectors? And you're right. That's always been the challenge, right? The reason many people do chemical engineering in particular is because it's the most employable degree of them all, and most of them end up in the city working for merchant bankers. Yeah, I know that. So as long as we continue to produce more than enough people who have that breadth of numeric, logic, engineering, and communication skills, we'll be able to handle both sides of it. My worry is if our education shifts to one where we no longer encourage that degree of numeracy and science, then I get a bit concerned, because then there's not enough people who are able to question the logic. And it's quite funny. The week before COVID lockdown, I was in London, and I was at a talk by a guy who I'd never heard of before. I know him now, Sir Patrick Vallance. And Patrick was explaining that what he desperately wanted at that time were graduates coming out of the sort of sciences. I mean, I'm a chemist, but they were looking for the broader sciences and engineering skills to go to government and go and join the various policy groups. Because what he was finding was that all key decision makers had, I'm going to make enemies here, I don't mean to be, but all key decision makers had gone through a certain educational route that maybe involved politics, history, and sociology, or something like this. And they're fantastic people with fantastic brains, but had no clue at all about some of the implications or consequences of things that were being put on the table in front of them around manufacturing, around industry, around scientific challenges. We're too readily accepting glib lines that frankly defy the laws of physics. I'm not going to get into debate just here at PPE Oxford. Actually, that's what my daughter's just about to go and do. Well, no, something similar. She's going to do human sciences. She starts next week at Oxford. Oh, crumps, where was I going? I'm not going to get into the debate around hydrogen, but for instance, everyone's latched onto hydrogen. Oh, hydrogen solves everything. No, it doesn't. We certainly shouldn't be burning hydrogen, for goodness sake. It's blooming hard to make, and once you've made it, it's blooming impossible to store, and even if you can store it, it's really hard to transport. So why the hell do I want to then go and burn it? So some of those sorts of genuine debates about what really is the right thing to do at a technical level sometimes don't happen in this country, Luke, because there are too many people making decisions who maybe just who haven't been able to grasp the details of the science because it's complicated. It's back to our earlier point. This is really complicated. If it was a simple message and a simple solution, we would have actioned it, but it's not. It's hard.
A quick observation I'd like to make, but I mean, I'm the first to give financial services an unfair kicking, as people will remember. But actually, if you think about it, the way in which what they call FIRE, the finance, insurance, and real estate sectors, but certainly insurance can help, is by actually offering favourable or supportive terms to people doing adventurous things, and making joining in a little bit more of the risk. I want to bring in Ian Crossley, because I think that Ian's working with one or two of the others in the HVMC network, using artificial intelligence, and I'm wondering the extent to which AI and really clever software is going to achieve much of what you were talking about around the process thing. Ian, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And Graham, thanks for a great talk. I really enjoyed it. And you've used a lot of phrases I like, and a lot of things I like. But I think the first thing is people are living with legacies, things that have been created many, many years ago. And it goes back to what Graham was talking about. It's price and value. So people buy something and then they just sweat that asset till it dies. And they don't care about what it does, and they don't care if it works well, and they don't care about what the consequences of that action are. As long as they're making profit, they'll drive it. And AI in those circumstances won't help. Where AI can help is where people actually start with the end in mind. So they design something with the end in mind and they build it in that way and they create something. And then they can put in measures to measure performance, to measure usage of energy, to measure usage of materials, to measure emissions and understand them, and also capture the human knowledge into that. And that's where AI can be massive and can help. It can help with the very difficult for a human to decide little bits and pieces, but playing it in multi-dimensions. But I think the biggest problem we've got in this whole thing at the moment is we have to change our mindsets. We've been brought up as a consumer-based economy. We expect things, we want things, and we do them. And it's this whole thing about changing your values and realizing what is value rather than what's a cost. So I think that's the biggest start to it. The AI and all the other technologies will help, but they'll only help once we change.
We only got a couple of minutes left. I was watching Barry Leahy's face when you were going through the bit about collecting all the black plastic and then turning it into product. Barry, you obviously use a great deal of feedstock in your business, making these global exporter of playgrounds. How is it working for you? What measures are you taking at Playdale?
Listen, without wanting to repeat Stephen's fantastic talk at lunchtime that we talked about this, we're trying. We've just embedded it in our culture, but it's a continuous, isn't it? It's continuous improvement. It's continuously looking for it. But I was just mid-typing, and because of time, let me read out what I've just wrote. I put, Graham, great presentation, my favourite so far on Kaizen Central, straight talking conformist, and explain clearly why Scots are called tight. And I put, some of my best friends are Scottish, but the other R that was missing is never brought around. But it's all around culture to me. We are at a tipping point. We can have all the strategy and all the R's in the world, but until we embed it in culture, until there's a need for culture, then that's what it is. It's just a strategy. But the way that you explain those R's, I think that is great. And what Steve picked up on is about the communication. I genuinely mean it. The way you communicated that was excellent. And if we could go out and talk to leaders about those R's, it makes it quite simple. And it doesn't have to be blinding science. To show a Nutella jar to me, or talk about the milk float that we had, 40 years ago, I just think they're simple, stupid. And if I get it, that's my acid test of, this is quite simple.
Well, I'm delighted to say that I still get my milk delivered in bottles 3 times a week with eggs on a Friday. So we're reviving the old ways down here in West Sussex. Graham, I echo everything that Barry said. That was a fantastic presentation, and I really can't thank you enough. And I do believe that that leadership is obviously what I think in many ways we crave on so many of these issues, but leaders need to first of all understand. And I think only by keeping up the drumbeat of intelligent conversation around these issues rather than cheap messaging, I think, is the only way we can do it. And of course, we can listen to your daughters and all the other young people out there who we have enormous faith in them. I think we've probably got more faith in this young generation than previous generations have had in the upcoming lot. I just hope to heck that we leave them some kind of world that they can make something better from. So that really is what it's all about. Listen, everybody, thank you very very much. Graham, again, bless you for that. Really, really appreciate it. Wonderful to be back in our weekly Kaizen Central meetings, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, folks.
Take
Thanks
care.
for your time.
Have a great